house was silent, the kind of silence that felt wrong. Claire Turner sat on the couch, barely awake, her head resting against the back of the sofa. The soft hum of the baby monitor was the only sound in the room, a quiet reassurance that her little girl was safe in her crib upstairs. The screen flickered, just for a second. Static rippled across the black and white feed. Claire blinked, rubbing her tired eyes. Probably just interference. On the tiny screen, baby Isla lay in her crib, curled up beneath a light blanket. Peaceful. Still. Then, a shadow moved. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the baby monitor. The crib was right in front of the camera. No one else was in the room. No one should be in the room. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The screen flickered again, this time longer, glitching, the image warping in and out. The static grew louder, crackling like something was wrong. Then, the screen went black. Dead. Claire shot forward, her body wide awake now. She jabbed the power button, shook the monitor. Nothing. And then, a whisper. Soft, too soft to be coming from the monitor's speaker. Yet somehow, all around her, she's not alone. The voice was right next to her ear. The baby monitor sprang back to life, and the rocking chair in Isla's nursery was moving. The Turner family wanted a fresh start, a new beginning, far from the noise of the city. When they found the house, a grand old Victorian on the edge of town, it felt like fate. Tall windows, a wraparound porch, the kind of place that had history, charm, and the price almost too good to be true. Maybe that should have been the first sign. The day they moved in, the air inside felt heavy, like the walls were watching. Dust clung to the wooden banisters. The floors groaned beneath their feet, and every door had a way of closing on its own. But Claire and Daniel ignored it. They were busy unpacking, settling in, making it feel like home. And at first, it was good. Isla giggled as she crawled across the nursery floor. Claire filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh coffee. But Oliver was different. He was quiet. Too quiet. At first, Claire thought it was just the stress of the move. A new town, a new school. Kids take time to adjust. Then, one night, she heard him talking. Soft whispers from his room. Claire peeked in, expecting to see him playing with his toys, but he was sitting in front of the window, staring. Not outside, at the glass itself, like something was looking back at him. She asked him who he was talking to. Oliver didn't look away. "The man in the window," he said. Claire forced a smile. Kids and their imaginations. But then Oliver turned to her, his little face pale, eyes wide and unblinking. "He says he used to live here." Next morning, Claire mentioned it to the neighbors. Just small talk. They didn't smile. They didn't ask questions. They only said one thing. That house has been empty for a long, long time. Then they shut their doors. At first, it was little things. Doors left open that no one remembered opening. A draft that moved through the house, even when the windows were shut tight. The uneasy feeling that someone was standing just behind them, watching. Then, Oliver started sleepwalking. Claire found him one night, standing in the middle of the hallway, his small body rigid, his lips moving, whispering. The words, they didn't sound right. It wasn't gibberish, not the nonsense of a child's dream. It was something older. The rhythm, the tone, like a language that didn't belong to him. She shook him gently, her hands cold against his skin. "Oliver, sweetheart, wake up." His eyes snapped open, not slow, not hazy, like he had never been asleep. He looked up at her and smiled, a wrong kind of smile. The next night, Claire woke to Isla crying, but when she got to the nursery, she stopped. The crib, was on the opposite side of the room. She knew where she had left it. She knew no one else was awake. No one else could have moved it. She scooped 𝗬𝐿𝐴 up, pressing her against her chest, heart pounding. That's when she heard it, a giggle, light, playful, a child's giggle, crackling through the baby monitor. Claire's breath hitched. She turned the monitor screen toward her. The crib was empty. 𝗬𝐿𝐴 was in her arms. Then who was laughing? The next morning, Oliver sat at the kitchen table, hunched over a sheet of paper, crayon clutched tight in his small fingers. Claire sighed in relief. Something normal. What are you drawing, buddy? She asked, placing a hand on his back. Oliver didn't answer. She glanced at the paper. Her stomach dropped. A man. Tall. Too tall. His arms, his legs, thin, stretched, like they had been pulled longer than they were meant to be. His face, hollow. And he wasn't just standing in the drawing. He was looking through a window. Claire swallowed. Breathe. Stay calm. Oliver, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Who is that? Oliver finally looked up. The man in the window, he said. He likes to watch you sleep. Claire couldn't ignore it anymore. Oliver sleepwalking, the voices, the man in the window. Something was wrong with the house. She spent the night searching online, trying to find anything about the property, but there was nothing. No records, no history, like it had been erased. But then, she found it, an old newspaper article, buried in the archives. The Marlowe family vanishes. No trace, no answers. The photo beneath the headline showed a family standing on the very same porch where Claire had stood just weeks ago. A man, a woman, 2 children. They smiled, but their eyes looked hollow. The article was short, cold, no struggle, no sign of where they went. The only clue, a neighbor's report. We saw them standing in the windows. Every night, just standing there, staring, but the house was already empty. Claire felt sick. The next morning, she drove into town, the newspaper folded in her shaking hands. She found a local historian, an old man who had lived there his whole life. She placed the article in front of him. Do you know this house? The man's expression didn't change. He didn't even look at the paper. I know it. The Marlowe family. What happened to them? His jaw tensed. His fingers drummed against the counter. Gone, he said. Like the ones before them. Like the ones after. Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. There were others. The man exhaled, slow. His eyes, pale and heavy, locked onto hers. That house is a beacon, he said, and he never left. The words settled into her bones like ice. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't need to. That night, Claire made a call. Hello, this is Claire Turner. I need help. She hesitated, the words heavy in her throat. I think my house is haunted. A long pause. Then, a voice on the other end. Calm, unshaken. You've reached beyond the veil. Tell us everything. They arrived just before nightfall. 3 of them, each one different. Each one carrying their own reason for walking into the dark. Dr. Elias Carter, the skeptic. He believed in science, in logic, in things that could be measured. His eyes scanned the house like it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Riley Moore, the sensitive kind of person who didn't just see things. She felt them. As soon as she stepped inside, her breath hitched. Her hands clenched into fists. Something's wrong with this house, she whispered. And then there was Father Damien Walsh, a priest, but not the kind you see on Sundays. His eyes were heavy, haunted. He had seen things before, and now he was seeing them again. They set up their equipment. Cameras in every room, red lights blinking in the dark, motion sensors along the hallways, EVP recorders waiting to capture voices that shouldn't be there. Then they waited. The house held its breath, and when the clock struck the dead hour, it began. The first sign was the cold, not the kind you feel in winter, not the kind you can chase away with blankets or fire. This was unnatural. The temperature plummeted in seconds. The walls groaned under the weight of it. Their breath turned to mist in the air. Then, Riley gasped. She clutched her chest, her body shuddering. "He's watching from the window," she choked out, her voice barely more than a breath. "He's always watching." Dr. Carter turned, following her gaze, but there was nothing there. Only the window. Only the reflection of their own bodies in the dark glass. Then, a bang. Loud, violent. The walls shook. The cameras flickered. The EVP recorder crackled. The house felt it too. And then Claire screamed. "Oliver! Where's Oliver?" His bed was empty. The sheets pulled back, small footprints leading away. The house had taken him. The house was silent again. But not the kind of silence that brings peace. This silence was wrong. Claire clutched her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Oliver was gone. His bed, empty. The walls, humming with something unseen. Dr. Carter's hands flew over the keyboard, pulling up the security footage. The screen flickered, distorted for a moment. Then the video played. At first, Oliver was just standing in the hallway outside his room. Still. Too still. Then, he moved. Not walking, not running. He was moving backwards, step by step, his little feet dragging up the stairs, his head tilting at an unnatural angle. His face, blank. No emotion, no life. And his eyes, black. Not dark, not shadowed. Black, as if something had hollowed him out, leaving nothing but a body to be used. Riley stumbled back from the screen. "No," she whispered. No, this isn't just a ghost." Her breath hitched, her fingers digging into her arms. "There's something else here. Something stronger." The EVP recorder crackled, a voice low, crawling through the static. "Let me in." Then, a thud. Not from the monitor, from inside the walls. The team followed the sound, every step heavy with dread. The noise led them to the nursery. Claire's hands shook as she reached out, pressing her palm against the wall. The air was ice. Dr. Carter grabbed a flashlight, running it along the baseboard. Then, he stopped. A seam, a sliver of darkness where there shouldn't be one. A door hidden behind the wallpaper. With a groan, the wood gave way. The smell hit them first, damp, rot, the kind of scent that clings to things left behind for too long. Inside, a crawl space, narrow, too narrow. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She saw the papers first, dozens of them, tiny crumpled sheets shoved between the cracks of the wood. She reached for one, unfolded it. Her stomach turned, child's handwriting, uneven, desperate. He seized through the glass. A whisper slithered through the air, a child's whisper. Riley stepped forward, her flashlight sweeping across the space. And then, they saw them. Bones, small, fragile, tucked deep into the crawl space like they had never been meant to be found. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. Father Walsh swallowed hard. "Dear God," he murmured. Then, a glint of metal, half buried in the dust, wrapped in something old and crumbling. Dr. Carter bent down, pulling it free. A key, rusted. The design carved deep into the handle, an emblem at the top, the 𝗪𝘁𝗰𝐵 family crest. Before anyone could speak, the key moved. It twisted upright in Dr. Carter's palm, as if something had just claimed it. And in the darkness of the crawl space, something breathed. Father Walsh knew. The moment he saw the key, the moment the air shifted around them, thick with something old and hungry, he knew. This wasn't just a house. It was something else, something built on suffering. His hands trembled as he pulled out his Bible, but the weight of it felt useless in his grip. "We need to leave," he muttered. But Claire shook her head, her eyes wild with fear. "Not without Oliver." Father Walsh closed his eyes, took a breath. Then he spoke. "There was a church here, long ago." His voice was steady, but his heart pounded. "An orphanage, a place meant for the lost, the abandoned, the ones with nowhere else to go." Dr. Carter frowned, crossing his arms. "And?" Father Walsh hesitated. "Then it burned." The room seemed to exhale, the shadows stretching along the walls. Fire swallowed everything. The church, the children, the priest who ran it. Father Gideon Marlowe. Riley shivered, her arms wrapping around herself. "What did he do?" she whispered. Father Walsh's jaw tightened. Things a man of God should never do. The words hung in the air, heavy with something unsaid. The townsfolk found out. It took years, but they learned the truth. A long pause. They locked him inside, and they burned it to the ground. Silence. Only the sound of breathing, of fear pressing against their ribs. Claire swallowed hard. "Then why is he still here?" Father Walsh turned to her, his face pale. "Because before the fire consumed him, before his flesh melted away, he spoke his last words." The candles flickered. The EVP recorder hissed, "I will watch you suffer. Forever." Claire's breath hitched. Dr. Carter scoffed, shaking his head. "And you believe that?" Father Walsh looked up. "Tell me, Doctor, do you ever wonder why people feel like they're being watched?" Dr. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but then a shadow moved, not in the room, in the window. A face, jarred, hollow, staring back at them, watching, always watching. Oliver was in the nursery, standing, still. His small frame faced the window, hands limp at his sides. The dim glow from the streetlights cast his shadow long against the floor. Claire stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Oliver." He didn't turn, didn't blink. His eyes rolled back, nothing but white. Riley gasped, one hand clutched to her chest. "It's not just a ghost," she whispered. Her breath came in short, frantic bursts. "It's an entity." Father Walsh grabbed his rosary, his fingers pressing against the worn beads. His expression was grim. He doesn't want to haunt this house. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. He wants a child. Then Oliver moved, not by choice. His body lifted, his feet leaving the floor, as if unseen hands had yanked him up by the ribs. Claire screamed. The walls trembled. The crib slammed against the far side of the room, the mattress flipping as if tossed by an invisible force. The window behind Oliver shattered inward. A deep voice slithered through the air, thick as smoke, cold as death. "He is mine." The glass shards froze in midair, suspended, reflecting something wrong. Not the nursery, not their world. Something burned. The wooden beams of a church, blackened and broken, cinders floating like dying stars. And through the jagged remains of the window, rows of small charred bodies. Claire dropped to her knees. "Take me instead," she sobbed. "Please, please take me instead." The house shook, the floorboards splitting, the very foundation groaning under the weight of something ancient and hungry. And then he stepped through the glass. Father Gideon Marlowe. His body was twisted, burned beyond recognition. His mouth stretched wide in a grin that should not be possible, blackened lips peeling back to reveal jagged, broken teeth. his eyes hollow, yet somehow still watching. His charred fingers reached for Oliver's floating body. "He belongs to me." Father Walsh stood firm, raising his Bible high. "No," he commanded. His voice no longer shook. "You do not own this child." The words, they mattered. Marlowe's head snapped toward him, his face contorting in rage. The walls cracked, the house splitting apart at the seams. The priest's voice rose above it all. "By the power of God, I command you, release this boy." A shriek, inhuman, piercing. Oliver's body convulsed, then dropped. Claire caught him before he hit the floor, pressing him against her chest, sobbing. Marlowe reeled, his form flickering, fighting against something stronger than him. The glass in the window twisted, melted, pulled him back. His body contorted as if he were being dragged into the reflection. The burned orphanage rippled behind him. Then, with one final sickening howl, he was gone. The house stilled. The wind died. The shattered glass lay unmoving on the nursery floor. For the first time since they had moved in, the house was quiet. Claire cradled Oliver, rocking him gently, whispering his name over and over, as if trying to pull him back to her. Father Walsh exhaled, his hands still gripping the Bible, his knuckles white. Riley stared at the window, eyes wide, body trembling. "It's over," Dr. Carter whispered, but Riley didn't move, didn't blink. Her voice barely made it past her lips. "No, it's not." The others turned, and then they saw it. The window was still, but the reflection inside, the shadows didn't match. Marlowe's face melted into the darkness, but his eyes were still there, watching, always watching. The house felt empty, not the kind of empty that brings relief, not the kind where you can finally breathe again. This emptiness felt wrong. The investigators packed their equipment in silence. No victory, no celebration, just the quiet understanding that they had come face to face with something that should not exist. Father Walsh lingered at the doorway, his fingers wrapped tight around his rosary. His lips moved in a silent prayer, but his eyes never left the windows, as if he was waiting for something, as if he didn't believe it was truly over. Claire and Daniel didn't argue. They didn't waste time pretending everything was fine. They were leaving, packing what they could, stuffing bags, shoving boxes into the back of their car. Oliver sat on the porch, legs swinging, face calm, too calm. Claire knelt in front of him, smoothing his hair, searching his eyes for any trace of him. Her Oliver, the one she had almost lost. "You okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. He blinked, smiled. "He's gone now," he said softly. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She pulled him into her arms, pressing a kiss against his temple. "Yes, baby," she murmured. "He's gone." Oliver shifted in her arms. But Claire froze, his little fingers uncurled, resting in his palm. A fragment of glass, tiny, almost invisible, but the edges shimmered, wrong, catching the light like something alive. "He left me something." Claire's stomach dropped. Her gaze flickered to the window beside them, to the reflection inside, and in the glass. Something moved. Something watched. Some say that reflections hold trapped spirits. But what if they can trade places?